Imagine the ocean swallowing your entire city in pitch darkness. Picture yourself standing on a balcony, watching a massive wall of black water rise higher than the clouds, blocking out the stars, blocking out the moon, until there is absolutely nothing left but a cold, crushing weight. Imagine realizing in those final, freezing seconds that the water isn't trying to drown you. It is trying to hide what lies underneath. It is trying to seal a secret away from human history, burying it so deep that no one will ever find it again. When you clicked on this video, you probably expected to see a beautiful, classic story about a lost paradise. Your mind naturally pictured a golden age of magnificent glass towers, hyper-advanced technology, flying machines, and peaceful, enlightened philosophers living in perfect harmony. You are not alone in this thought. For hundreds of years, humanity has nurtured this exact illusion. We have taken an ancient, bloody catastrophe and turned it into a beautiful, safe childhood fairy tale. We have romanticized the abyss. We look out across the vast Atlantic Ocean and want to believe that somewhere down in the mud lies the key to human perfection. We want to believe that we once built a perfect world, and that if we just look hard enough, we can find our way back to it. But reading the original Greek texts dissolves the fantasy. Plato's account shows Atlantis was not paradise but a militarized, authoritarian structure of war and corruption. The earth itself, in the myth, destroys it as judgment. The story is not tragedy alone but cosmic erasure. To understand it, we must remove later inventions of glowing cities and peaceful citizens. The legend's origin is far more unsettling than any flood or geological event. The horror lies in the human mind itself, and Plato's story was a warning, not inspiration. Your mind desperately wants to paint this city as an open, sprawling utopia. You imagine wide, beautiful streets, sunlit plazas, and citizens walking freely through parks, enjoying a life of absolute liberty and peace. But look at what the philosopher Plato actually wrote in his dialogue called Critias in 360 BCE. When you read the architectural measurements and the structural design he mapped out, you realize this was not a free city. It was a massive structural prison. The capital was engineered with a terrifying forced geometry. It was structured in forced circles, 3 rings of water and 2 of land, creating a physical barrier that divided the population into distinct, isolated, and highly controlled tiers. This was a society built on absolute segregation. If you lived on the outer ring, you could never cross into the inner rings without strict permission. Every single boundary was monitored, locked, and guarded. The text describes how the Atlanteans built massive bridges and bored deep tunnels through the rings of land, creating heavily guarded checkpoints that controlled every single drop of human movement. They lined the walls with towers and gates, turning their entire capital into a giant panopticon where no one could hide and no one could move without the state knowing about it. The materials they used to build these walls reveal an obsession with power and intimidation. Plato wrote that they quarried stone from underneath the center of the island stone that was naturally black, white, and red. They did not build for beauty. They built for psychological dominance. The outermost wall, which surrounded the largest ring of water, was completely covered in brass. The second wall was coated in tin. But the innermost wall, protecting the royal palace and sacred citadel, was sheathed in orichalcum, a metal said to glow with fiery red light. From outside, the city would appear as a massive crimson structure under storm skies, projecting power and confinement. It was not a peaceful commune, but a machine of control. The lies of modern pop culture have taught you that the leaders of Atlantis were wise, gentle guardians who guided humanity toward enlightenment. But the ancient text tears that illusion away, exposing a ruling class that was terrifyingly unnatural. The origin of the Atlantean leadership was born from a cosmic violation. According to Plato, the sea god Poseidon took a mortal human girl named Cleito and isolated her on this island. To protect his prize, he carved the very rings of water and land that defined the city, trapping her inside a fortress of his own making. From this union, Poseidon fathered 10 sons, creating a bloodline of half-god, half-human hybrids. These 10 sons became the 10 absolute kings of Atlantis, dividing the vast continent into 10 distinct realms, with the eldest brother, Atlas, ruling over the central crimson citadel. For many generations, this divine bloodline kept the kings virtuous. They possessed immense spiritual power, but they used it with restraint. They despised the corrupting weight of gold, ignored luxury, and cared only for honor, justice, and the laws carved by Poseidon on an orichalcum pillar inside their central temple. But divine blood is not immortal. As the centuries passed, the kings began to marry mortal human beings. With every generation, the divine spark of Poseidon grew weaker and weaker, diluted by human mortality and weakness. Plato explicitly describes this shift as a spiritual rot. He wrote that when the divine element within them became faint, and they became infected with human corruption, they could no longer bear the weight of their immense prosperity. They became intoxicated by their own wealth. They looked at their endless piles of gold, their massive palaces, and their absolute power, and they developed an insatiable addictive sickness of endless greed. Right now, as you watch this, you are probably thinking that the corruption of Atlantis was just an internal tragedy, a localized problem that stayed contained within the borders of their isolated island. But it wasn't. When a superpower loses its soul, its madness always spills across its borders, transforming it into a global infection. Atlantis grew into a hyper-militarized, predatory empire that weaponized its advanced engineering to build the most terrifying war machine the ancient world had ever seen. They stripped their continent of its natural resources, cutting down entire forests to build a navy of 1,200 massive warships, and emptying their mountains to forge weapons for an army of hundreds of thousands of mercenaries, chariot drivers, and heavy infantry. They did not build this colossal force for defense. They built it to conquer, to plunder, and to break the spirit of every free nation on earth. The ancient texts tell us that the Atlantean war machine launched an unprovoked, massive invasion that swept through the Mediterranean like a tidal wave of bronze and blood. They sailed past the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar today, and attacked every civilization in their path. They conquered North Africa all the way to the borders of Egypt, and they marched through Europe, shattering kingdoms and burning cities until they reached the edge of Greece. They did not come to trade, they did not come to share their knowledge, and they did not come to bring peace. They came to systematically butcher anyone who stood in their way, to steal every ounce of wealth they could find, and to drag millions of innocent people back to their concentric island in heavy iron chains to live out their lives as expendable slaves. They were an apex predator erasing human freedom from the face of the map, and no one could stop them. Every kingdom that stood against them was instantly crushed under the wheels of their chariots and the sheer numbers of their fleet. They were completely blind to their own moral decay, celebrating their violence as a sign of their divine superiority. They believed that because they were born from a god, they had a cosmic right to own the world. They were an unstoppable wave of tyranny, moving across the earth with absolute impunity, convinced that they were untouchable. They had conquered the land, they had enslaved the people, and they had filled their red citadel with the gold of a dozen ruined nations. They believed they had won, but their arrogant march was about to take them directly into the path of a force that could not be conquered by warships or bronze spears. The universe itself was watching, and the cosmic ledger was about to be balanced in the most horrific way possible. When a civilization becomes this toxic, when its arrogance grows so massive that it threatens the moral balance of existence, its destruction is never a random accident. It is entirely deliberate, calculated, and absolute. You might assume from modern stories that the downfall of Atlantis was just a natural cycle of the Earth, a random, unfortunate shift in geology, a generic earthquake, or a freak storm that happened to hit the wrong place at the wrong time. But that thought completely strips away the deep structural terror of the original text. Plato makes it explicitly clear that what happened to Atlantis was not a tragedy of nature. It was a systematic cosmic execution. The aggressive hubris of the Atlantean Empire had disgusted the heavens. They had filled the world with so much violence, greed, and suffering that the spiritual laws of the universe demanded their total erasure. According to the dialogue, Zeus, the chief god of the universe, who rules by law and justice, looked down from his heavenly throne and saw the horrific state into which this once noble race had fallen. He saw their temples slick with the blood of sacrificed animals and conquered slaves. He saw their hearts completely corrupted by the love of power, and he realized that they were beyond saving. They could not be reformed. They could not be reasoned with, and they would never willingly stop their global campaign of terror. Zeus did not send a warning. He did not send a prophet. Instead, he gathered all the gods to his most holy habitation, which stands at the center of the universe and looks out over all creation. And once they were assembled, he pronounced a final, systemic judgment. This wasn't a punishment designed to teach a lesson. It was a sentence of total termination. The universe didn't just want to defeat their armies on the battlefield. It wanted to completely delete their home, their culture, their wealth, and their memory from the face of existence. The gods weaponized the very elements of creation against the island fortress. The sky over the Red City turned the color of a bruised corpse as the atmosphere collapsed into a violent vortex. The ocean, which had once been the source of their global power and their divine lineage, turned against them. The water around the concentric rings began to boil and churn with a sickening fury, as if the sea itself was trying to vomit the corrupted civilization out of its waters. Every single dynamic of nature was redirected toward a single, terrifying goal: the absolute destruction of Atlantis. The trap was set, the sentence was passed, and the execution was about to begin with a speed that defies human comprehension. When you read the words "sunken city," your brain automatically visualizes a slow, graceful, and peaceful descent. You picture a massive island gently settling into the sand over decades or centuries, like an old wooden ship slowly taking on water and slipping beneath a calm surface. You imagine the buildings staying perfectly intact as the water quietly rises to cover them. But the ancient text tears that peaceful image away, replacing it with a frantic, agonizing race against a 24-hour clock. Plato writes with terrifying precision that the entire continent, with all its millions of citizens, its massive armies, its golden palaces, and its towering crimson walls, was completely wiped out in a single day and a single night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods. Think about the sheer, overwhelming psychological panic of that timeline. There was no time to prepare. There was no time to build rafts, no time to pack belongings, and absolutely nowhere to run. The catastrophe struck with the suddenness of a lightning bolt. In a matter of minutes, the solid, unshakable earth beneath their feet turned into a violent, shifting liquid. The massive stone foundations that had stood for thousands of years began to crack, snap, and separate like brittle glass. Giant palaces that had been built to display the eternal power of the kings toppled over like children's toys, crushing thousands of people instantly under thousands of tons of falling rock. The concentric rings of land, which the Atlanteans thought made their city an unassailable fortress, turned into a series of deadly traps. As the ground fractured, massive chasms opened up in the streets, swallowing entire neighborhoods whole, dropping families into pitch-black fires burning deep within the earth's crust. The mountains collapsed into the valleys, and the valleys split open to reveal boiling water exploding from deep underground. People ran through the shaking streets in absolute terror, blind, screaming, and looking for safety, only to find that every single direction led to destruction. The outer rings were collapsing into the sea, while the inner rings were sinking into the earth. The very concept of stability was deleted from their world. The wealthy, the powerful, the slaves, and the kings were all reduced to the exact same state of raw, primal panic. They realized, in a flash of absolute horror, that everything they had built, their entire global empire, their entire history, their entire civilization was dissolving into nothingness in a matter of hours. The 24-hour clock was ticking, and with every second that passed, the solid world was slipping away, preparing for the final suffocating blow from the ocean. It is incredibly easy for us to sit in the modern world, thousands of years later, and think of this event as a clean, clinical, historical footnote. We read a brief summary of a myth and move on with our day. But you have to force yourself to visualize the brutal, visceral, physical reality of how these millions of people actually died. As the foundations of the island broke apart, a massive mega-tsunami, wall of solid black ocean water over 50 feet high rose up from the horizon, moving with the terrifying speed of a jet airliner. It slammed into the outer walls of Atlantis, instantly crushing the brass and tin barriers, turning the outer rings into a violent whirlpool of debris, mud, and human bodies. There was no escape from the water. As the land rapidly sank into the mantle of the earth, the ocean rushed in from every direction to fill the void. Millions of screaming men, women, and children were trapped in a vice between collapsing concentric stone walls and the incoming Black Sea. The water did not just rise. It exploded into their homes, shattered their doors, and hunted them down in the dark. It filled their rooms, trapped them against ceilings, and forced its way into their lungs in absolute darkness. Imagine the terror, the roar of the ocean drowning human screams, the freezing shock of Atlantic saltwater, and the loss of all light as the sky vanished. People were tossed through churning currents, slammed against falling pillars, and ripped apart by debris. They held their breath until their lungs burned, until their bodies forced them to inhale, filling their chests with freezing salt water. It was not a sudden death. It was slow suffocation. In a single night, a vibrant capital became a silent mass grave. An entire continent, with all its pride, gold, and millions of souls, was buried under crushing ocean water, hidden forever from the sun, silenced for human history. The sea closed over them, the waves flattened, and the world became quiet again, as if they had never existed. At this point you might think this is just a myth, a moral story made by an ancient philosopher. But the truth is more terrifying. The nightmare of Atlantis is based on a real apocalypse. Nature did not copy Plato, Plato copied nature. Around 1600 BCE, the Aegean Sea held a volcanic island named Thera, now Santorini. It was home to the advanced Bronze Age Minoan civilization. They built multi-story villas, plumbing systems, traded widely, and created rich artwork. But beneath them, a volcano awakened. It did not just erupt. It produced an ultra-Plinian supereruption equal to hundreds of atomic bombs. The explosion tore the mountain apart, sending ash and gas over 20 miles into the sky, blocking the sun and turning day into darkness. Then the magma chamber collapsed. With nothing supporting the mountain, the island caved inward into the sea, forming a caldera that swallowed the land in seconds. This collapse displaced billions of tons of water, generating mega tsunamis that reshaped the Mediterranean. The Earth has the power to erase civilizations instantly. And it has done so to real people who believed their world was safe just moments before destruction. You might think this was justice, that an evil empire was punished, but that is the fiction. In Plato's story, Atlantis deserved its fate. In reality, the victims were innocent. The collapse of Thera sent mega tsunamis racing across the Mediterranean at jet speed. Waves over 50 feet high struck Crete, destroying ports, merchant fleets, and palaces within minutes, collapsing the Minoan economy almost instantly. But water was only the beginning. A volcanic cloud rained pumice, ash, and stone across the region. The sky turned bruised and dark. Toxic sulfur gas spread through the air. People could not breathe. They ran into darkness, coughing as ash tore their throats and filled their lungs. Water sources disappeared, sunlight vanished, and the air became poison. Parents held choking children as they collapsed. They did not understand volcanoes. To them, the universe had broken and the gods were killing them. Their trauma became oral memory, passing through generations until it reached Plato, who transformed it into metaphor. Now we face the core of the Atlantis myth. Modern explorers still search for a lost city beneath the ocean. But geology proves something absolute. A sunken Atlantic continent is impossible. The mid-Atlantic ridge shows that tectonic plates are pulling apart, not collapsing inward. New crust forms there constantly. There is no missing landmass. This leads to a disturbing realization. If Atlantis as a continent never existed, then the millions who supposedly died there also never existed. Plato built an entire civilization from imagination, populated it, gave it culture and kings, then destroyed it as a warning. He used fictional suffering as political metaphor for Athens, which was becoming greedy and imperial. He combined memory of real disasters like Thera with imagination and created a psychological weapon, a story designed to terrify citizens into moral restraint. But the tragedy is that humanity ignored the warning and instead became obsessed with finding the lost city, turning the myth into treasure instead of reflection. And that brings us to the final, most terrifying realization. For over 2,400 years, humanity has missed the point of the story. We have obsessed over finding the physical ruins of Atlantis, searching the deep sea for a lost utopia, because it is easier than looking inward and confronting the darkness within ourselves. We ignored Plato's warning. Instead of fearing Atlantis, we fell in love with its imagined power. Look at the modern world. We have built systems driven by endless consumption, arrogance, and global domination, repeating the same patterns Plato described. We consume the earth, divide populations, build walls of control, and chase wealth while slowly eroding our own foundations. We are not studying Atlantis anymore, we are reenacting it. The ocean is not hiding a golden city. It is hiding a reminder of how quickly civilization can vanish when pride overtakes restraint and power overtakes justice. Plato's story was a warning that human arrogance has limits. And when that limit is crossed, collapse can come suddenly and completely. We are still searching the dark for ruins that never existed, while ignoring the cracks forming beneath our own world. The tide is rising and we are still looking down.